Welcome to today's webinar entitled Hidden Treasure Preserved, FRUPAC Maps of the Pacific War. My name is Lauren Cornegay-Dollar, and I am the new Adult Programs Coordinator here at the National Museum of the Pacific War. Joined today in studio, I have with me Reagan, Director of Collections and Exhibits. Reagan, would you mind giving us a little bit of detail, history of the FRUPAC Maps?
Okay, FRUPAC stands for Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, and these guys operated out of, during the war, they operated in Nimitz's headquarters at Pearl Harbor. And part of what they did was record all of the radio traffic that was happening all over the Pacific. And what we're going to look at today are the maps that these guys generated. And for every day of the war, these guys had a fresh map that they would put over their table, and they would record the goings on and the radio traffic of all the activity in the Pacific that they were able to gather and compile there at Pearl Harbor. And when you look at these maps, you're able to see a really finite picture of a day in the life in the Pacific War. And taken as a whole, you can see lots of history unfold. And some of the maps are really very colorful and active. And if you take a look at any one in particular, you'll see blue lines for Allied ship movements and red lines for Japanese warship movements, orange lines for Japanese merchant shipping movements. And there's notations all over these maps that indicate B-24s took off from this place to attack Tokyo, or there's weather patterns and weather events are recorded on these maps, and like I said, they're just a really a good look at a day in the life of the Pacific, and we're really very lucky to have these maps in our collection. And Lauren, I understand that you were instrumental in setting up these maps to be digitized when y'all took a trip to Cofile.
Yes, we went up to Cofile and we were able to get some behind the scenes footage to be able to show our lovely audience today. So I'm going to go ahead and roll that footage of the video that we made.
I was really excited about this project because I come from a military background. I have about 10 years deployed time between being in the service and doing military contract work, as well as my grandfather actually served in World War II in Southeast Pacific. And we have some extensive family history there where I can kind of follow along with his unit's backstory, as well as follow along where his unit moved through these maps in the notes that have been captured here.
My maternal grandmother was serving in World War II in the Pacific Theater. She was a nurse on a medical ship. So being able to look at these on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis and receiving a bird's eye view of the events in the Pacific Theater is a fascinating and kind of humbling experience.
We had the pleasure of watching history unfurl itself in front of us.
When I came into the offices and saw this collection, I was fascinated. I had a bit of a reverence for it. To see this kind of history and to recognize what it represented, the significance of it, was pretty special. As somebody whose grandfather served in the Navy during World War II in the Pacific Fleet, recognizing that somewhere on these maps he's represented is pretty special to my family.
So when my grandfather served, the locations on this map specifically were that he had started in New Guinea, and then they had gone back over to Solomon Islands, where he was actually shot and received the Purple Heart. And then once he returned to unit, I think they returned to his unit back up at Mindanao before they continued northwest.
I'm going to need to jot these numbers down.
When our logistics team showed up at the museum to document and take these tubes back to our facility, I wanted to make sure that we had a clear chain of custody So as each one of my logistics team was removing a tube, I documented on an assessment sheet any kind of markings that were on the tube. Not knowing how many maps were in each tube, it was very important to document every tube that left the museum.
So when these maps first came in and we got to open them out of the tubes that they had been, saved in and preserved in for years, it was really exciting to see that really this much history had been preserved and still remained today, right? I think for the most part, we largely expect this to no longer be in existence, especially when all of this at some point was highly classified information.
Cofile at its core is a preservation business, and we will preserve and restore documents that have some form of intrinsic value. It could be pictures, it could be permanent records that are deemed permanent from the state. It might be state archive information. We love dealing with museum work. We are preserving history for our citizens, for the nation, for all time.
When the maps first came in, there was a degree of, trepidation bordering on fear, because we've received 2 very large boxes filled with these, almost stacked up to the brim, and these are substantial looking tubes. And whenever documents over a certain age are brought in that have been in storage for a significant length of time, there's always concerns about, what are these going to look like? How bad is any damage going to be? Are they going to be salvageable? Thankfully, most of these were in fairly good condition. There are 1 or 2 maps that had a bit heavier damage, but that's relatively easy to take care of. And after a while, it just sort of settled into a nice daily routine of taking care of these maps and fixing them up so that future generations could look at them. There were a few challenges with these maps, specifically because the maps are so large. These were meant to go on a light table for the Department of Defense, so they are both very large and very thin material. These were meant to be overlaid on top of each other and allow the light to show through so we can track ship movements on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. So maneuvering these around and making sure that they weren't damaged any further was a particular thing we had to take care about.
What really stands out to me and makes me so excited about these maps is when I was in the military, I worked in UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, and a lot of what we were gathering for intelligence was to do a very similar thing and plot out everything on these maps that we're seeing day to day. And that's what's so unique about these, is you can see every action as it occurs, time stamped, date stamped, enemy action, friendly updates, as well as routine reconnaissance missions occurring, whether it be by land, by air, just visual sightings. And it really makes it exciting to be able to follow it through. Really, it's just exciting to be able to see the history behind it and how much the level of detail that was captured in each and every one of these to go through and almost see how all the pieces of the puzzle moved day by day, ultimately leading to the end of the war.
The preservation process for documents such as these is fairly in-depth. To begin with, we will usually clean off the document, getting rid of any dust, debris, bug droppings, and things of that nature. After that, we will typically mend any tears that are on the document itself, as well as backing the document with specific materials in order to, give the document more stability and greater resistance to tearing in the future. We will also remove any tape that has been placed onto the document, because that can stain and damage the document going forth, as well as try to clean off and mitigate any stains that are already on there. After that, we will typically heat press the document to get rid of any wrinkles and to secure the backing material. After that, we will take it down to imaging, where it will be put into a scanner and digitized, and then brought back here for storage and archival.
As far as all of the maps, my personal two favorite are obviously the 6th and the 9th of August, 1945 for the bomb drops on both, the atomic bomb drops on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to which they specifically call out that it was the first bomb drop of that type in the history, as well as the second being dropped. So, and you can also, of course, see all the movements occurring on the battlefield during that same time period, which is quite significant. Not only to note our actions, but also, some of the reactions from those strikes occurring.
These two maps in particular show the troop movements and ship movements around the days of the two nuclear bomb droppings on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The notes up here will be details on operations that are being carried out by ships on the map itself. These will list specific troop movements, specific events such as the Soviet Union declares war on Japan, as well as other major incidents that the Navy thought were relevant. There are two maps in particular that I do kind of like. You've probably seen them in previous shots. They are two maps that show the Battle of Okinawa and the Battle of Iwo Jima. Those are particularly impressive looking maps, just with all the little troop movements and arrows and lines across the page.
I just can't wait to see these in the museum myself. Me and my family will absolutely be down there to check it out. And, I hope others are able to take the same enjoyment out of this that I have, all of my colleagues have. We've all been down to look at these. It's really an incredible series of pieces to preserve.
So we really enjoyed our time up there getting behind the scenes look at Cofile and all the great work they do up there preserving documents for future generations. And I'm very excited today because we have a few of Cofile's representatives here to answer questions as we move into our Q&A section. But first, I'd like to introduce them. First, we have Kathy Drolet, Account Executive, if you'd like to wave. And then we have Ryan Ingren, Senior Project Manager. And last but not least, we have Cheryl Cherry, Director of Product Marketing. And as we let questions kind of filter in for them to speak to, I'm going to throw it over to Reagan to talk a little bit about how we got the maps and next steps for them.
Okay, the maps came to us as a gift from the U.S. Naval Cryptologic Veterans Association. And these guys maintain and keep a museum in Pensacola, Florida, where the whole history of cryptography in the Navy is told. And it's not at the Naval Air Station, it's up the street from the Naval Air Station. And I believe that that's where all of the Navy's cryptanalysts are still trained today. But these guys somehow procured the maps from a warehouse in Indiana and put them into their collection, realizing what they had. And they thought that this museum might be a good place to deposit them, to donate them, with the hopes that we would eventually get to where we were able to do with those maps something like what we just saw. So we finally have gotten to a position where we're able to digitize these maps and preserve these maps the way they have always needed to have been treated. And so they came to us in about 2013 or 2014 or so, and so I'm glad to see that we're finally able to keep that promise that we made to the cryptographic or Cryptologic Veterans Association.
Okay, so we have a question that's come in. How many maps are there?
So sure, thank you for asking. There was a total of 844 maps that were rolled up into 62 tubes. And what that generated as an end result was archival images of over 1,500 images, because we image every important piece of information both on the front of the map and on the reverse side of the map. So many of these maps had notations on the back side as well, which is also captured in the imaging process.
We have another question that's come in. Do you expect to receive more maps?
I believe we've got the entire collection that the Cryptologic Veterans Association had. And it's important to remember that there was one map for every day of the war. Every day, the guys that were in charge of making these notations on these maps would put out a blank map at the beginning of the day and record all of the day's traffic, radio traffic, all over that map. And then at the end of that day, they would roll it up and put it away, start with a new one. So the maps that we do have, we're extremely fortunate to have, because they're ones of a kind. They're the only ones like them that exist.
I have a question for our Cofile representatives. Since you guys got to work with the maps and see them up close and personal for a while, is there a favorite map that you have, or something that stands out from one of the specific maps that you think is really impactful? Let's start with Kathy.
Well, the map that Ryan showcased in the video is by far one of the most emotional maps. So that again is my favorite. I love the notations, the little snapshot of history of that point in time from that day. I will say we have clients that tour our facility, and it's going to be a shame when we have to return these maps back, because we're going to miss them.
Okay. How about Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. So honestly, for me, like Kathy said, or we saw in the video, really the 6th or the 9th are probably the largest significance, just because of the impact behind the actions that occurred on those days. However, I haven't had the opportunity to go through every one by one, and I'm really looking forward to it being in the museum, so I can do exactly that, right, and kind of follow along with my grandfather's story. And I imagine I'll find some other maps in there that do have even more personal significance to me when I'm able to review it at length.
Cheryl, do you have a favorite map or a favorite notation on a map or something like that?
Not necessarily, but what I did enjoy was seeing all my colleagues and the personal emotional experience that they went through when they saw the maps, because so many of my colleagues had parents, grandparents that were in the war, and just to see them follow them along on the maps and to have that kind of a real life experience so tangible right in front of them, it just gives me chills thinking about it. It was beautiful.
One of my favorite maps was a submarine that was named. I don't recall the date, and I don't recall the name of the submarine, but somewhere on one map there was a named submarine that found a message in a bottle. There was no other information on the map about the message. I suppose if you wanted to go further, you would need to find that submarine's records and see if the ship's log mentioned finding the message in the bottle and what that message may have been. And also, another one that I particularly enjoyed was in December of '44, when Halsey's Third Fleet was hit by the typhoon off the north coast of Luzon. That storm is tracked over a period of several days. And you can see the track of the typhoon, and you can see some of the damage that it's doing to the fleet, because those things are noted on that map. And then even some follow-up rescue attempts and efforts when the typhoon blew itself out.
I thought it was really neat getting to see them in person and getting to speak with some of the Cofile representatives while we were there, and their passion for the maps and how invested they were in their care. I thought that was an amazing testament to Cofile's work. And also, I just kind of nerded out on on the maps and all the different pieces of information that were compiled into one place. Thought that was really cool. And I love color coding, and apparently so did they. So you could see all the different colors they used, and you spoke to that earlier,
right,
about the color coding.
Yeah.
While we still have you for a little bit longer, can you talk about the potential digitization and indexing?
Oh, okay. The job is not done now that they've been digitized. We've got to extract metadata from these maps so that they can be useful. And some of the subjects and things like that we're going to try and extract would include, obviously, the date of the map, any important units or ships that get mentioned, or any events that occur, like known dates for particular battles or something like that. So we'll be extracting some information from each individual map and making that information about that map available. And one of the opportunities that we also have here at the museum is we have entered into a partnership with the University of North Texas, and we're going to be putting a lot of digital assets that belong to the museum onto UNT's portal to Texas history. So we've just entered into an agreement with the University of North Texas, and so our digital assets have not been delivered just yet, but they are coming. So in the future, these maps ought to be available for review online through UNT's portal to Texas history. That is one of the goals long-term goals that we've had at the museum, and how to present these maps, how to share these maps, how to make them accessible, and hopefully fulfill the vision that the U.S. Naval Cryptologic Veterans Association, the vision that they originally had to share these maps. So it's taken a while, but we're finally getting some serious movement in that direction.
Right, and I believe we've had special cases made for them, so they will, if people request to see them in person, we have an easier way of seeing them. They won't be rolled up in the tubes anymore. Here we have a picture of what our new filing of these maps will look like. And Kathy, can you speak to some of the details on what makes this kind of filing so much better for the maps?
Absolutely. So these maps were rolled up into tubes, and paper, just like our clothing, remember things, creases, all of that kind of stuff. So the final resting place for these maps will be hangers they will be placed on non-acidic backing, each map, and there'll be 2 maps placed on one hanger, one on the front, one on the back, and the hanger will slide into what we call a plat cabinet. Now, because these maps were larger than your typical maps and plats, we had to make a custom-made plat cabinet along with the hangers and the sleeves. And that cabinet, along with the hangers and the sleeves, are due to arrive in mid-August. So then the process of mounting each map on non-acidic backing and placing both 2 maps on one hanger and then placing the hanger in the plat cabinet is going to be a long process. That's one outstanding item that we have yet to complete. The first one Reagan mentioned, which was the indexing of the metadata that's on each map. We want the maps to flow physically in the plat cabinet or the map cabinet, probably by chronological order. And then once we assign the metadata around each map, there would be an index book. So any individual that would like to take a look at a specific day, perhaps a specific battle, or a specific event, if we capture that metadata on each image and provide it in an index book, the user will know where to find that in the index book and go to the correct hanger in the plat map and pull that hanger out. Now remember, this is all archival preservation. We really don't want the maps to be removed from the Mylar sleeves, but the Mylar sleeves will protect each map so you can run your finger over it. You're not hindered by viewing any kind of detailed information. The goal is to keep our hands off the maps. And basically as well, the goal is to keep the public in the images. So we're not in the maps all the time. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, I think so. So that's about all the time we have for today, but I do want to shout out or do a quick thank you and a shout out to our donors who helped make this project possible. Without their donations, projects like this and other ones would not be possible. And we really thank you for your continued donation to the museum. We have another webinar coming up next month entitled Angels Against the Sun, Insights from the Author. We'll be speaking with author James Fenelon. And registration is open for that webinar right now. So thank you all for attending today, and we hope to see you next month.